Well, we know Aroldis Chapman is a Pittsburgh Pirate. What we don't is his role. What will it be in 2024 and how will it affect the rest of the bullpen? We'll talk about that on today's episode of Locked On Pirates.
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And folks, welcome back to the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates every day. My name is Ethan Smith, right there on that lower third. You can find me on Twitter at MVP_Ethan or at Locked On Pirates, giving you all of your news, analysis, opinions, and reactions to everything going on in the world of the Pittsburgh Pirates. And right now, everything going on in the world of the Pittsburgh Pirates, of course, is the signing of Aroldis Chapman on Monday. If you want, you can go check out myself and Gary's initial reaction to the signing on yesterday's show. You guys did absolutely phenomenal viewing that show on YouTube and your other phenomenal podcast platforms. And today, we're going to break down the signing some more and what it means for the bullpen structure, and if the Pirates may have one of the best units as far as the bullpen is concerned in all of baseball. And we're going to get right into it today, folks. I think it's very good to get right into this just because, again, we spoke about Chapman a little bit yesterday with Gary. We spoke about it mainly as an initial reaction because I think a lot of the dust was still settling. We were just finding out how much the money was going to be for him and why the Pirates were the team that ended up signing him, etc. But starting with Chapman again, he was solid last year with Kansas City and a part of the Rangers World Series roster. And as I said on yesterday's show, Aroldis Chapman signing with your team, that name just carries weight. It doesn't matter if he's not the same player that he was 8 years ago or what kind of player he is now. Just seeing that name signed with your team is going to carry weight. It's kind of like it when Joe Flacco signed with the Cleveland Browns in the NFL this year. He's obviously not the same Joe Flacco, despite being a pretty good player for them this year, but the name still carried weight. Same reigns true here for Aroldis Chapman. And an 80 or 58.1 innings pitched last year, Chapman had a 3.09 ERA with, and trust me, my reaction to seeing this was definitely something. He had 103 strikeouts last season, folks, in those 58 and 1/3 innings. So his age didn't show all that much last year. And if his production returns to form, I don't really expect much regression either. And his advanced metrics, which you guys know I love, really point to a fact that Aroldis Chapman was pretty much the same, if not a better player than he has been in past years. He sat in the 99th percentile in expected batting average and fastball velocity. He was in the 100th percentile in whiff and strikeout rate and the 95th percentile in expected ERA and extension rate. So when you hear these kind of things, yeah, I think Chapman still got it, folks. And his biggest concerns are what have been his biggest concerns for the entirety of his career. His chase rates were low again in the 5th percentile. His walk rate was in the 2nd percentile. Obviously, both of those ranking among the worst in all of baseball. So, yeah, that's a little bit concerning, but that's what Aroldis Chapman has always been. He's always been that guy that is going to have the high strikeout numbers. He's going to struggle with walks every now and then. He might have that blow-up appearance every now and then as well. And his pitch mix just doesn't really offer much as far as chase rate. The ball he's throwing is on average, as of last year, 99.5 miles per hour from the fastball. So that's just that kind of pitch where he's going to have to put it where it's supposed to go, or pitcher or opposing hitters just aren't going to swing at it. That's just the kind of thing that you're going to see from Aroldis Chapman. Now, again, he's going to be 36 next year. He's 35 right now. He turns 36 going into this season. Regression is always possible, but a lot of people hear the word regression and immediately panic. Like if a player is regressing, that means they're going to be horrible. That means they're going to be bad. That's not always the case. Now, especially with a guy like Aroldis Chapman, I wanted to use him as an example. If you want to be technical on regression and what regression is, that means that you're taking a step back from something that you've done in the past better in a better fashion. So to be technical, Aroldis Chapman technically regressed from his full 2021 campaign to 2023. I'm skipping over 2022 because he didn't pitch for the entirety of the year, but he had 6 less strikeouts in 2021 and an ERA of 3.36 last year. So what does that mean? That means he had 97 strikeouts and an ERA of 3.36. So yeah, he technically regressed from 2021 to 2023. But folks, if you're telling me that you're getting 2021 Aroldis Chapman, let's say he regresses even a little bit from 2021 to 2023, you look at this and you're saying, okay, let's say instead of 103 strikeouts, he has 85. And let's say his ERA, instead of it being a 3.36, it's a 3.54. Technically, that is regression. It technically is. Now, if you want to go back to 2021, he also ranked highly in every advanced metric that he usually does, like expected batting average, average velocity, and stuff like that. And he obviously ranked lowly in every advanced metric that he usually does that year. So he's been rather consistent over the past 2 or 3 years, if anything, again, outside of 2020 and 2022, where obviously in 2020, it wasn't a full year. And in 2022, he dealt with some injuries. So now with all of that said, and the fact that, again, even if he does regress a little bit, he's still going to be one of the better options in this bullpen, no matter what. But what is his role in Pittsburgh, I think, is the biggest question that you now have to ask. And, well, you already know they have their closer. David Bednar is going to be the closer on this roster. That is just clear cut, cookie cutter, not changing. If you think it's changing, reevaluate it, because it's not going to change. David Bednar is not going to be pushed out of the closer role. Now, there are going to be days, I think, where Aroldis Chapman could enter that closer's role because of rest, and David Bednar may be pitching 3 consecutive days or 2 consecutive days. And that's fine, because Aroldis Chapman has also been a closer in his career. We know that. He's been one of the better closers in baseball over the past decade. And it shouldn't be a surprise either to see Aroldis Chapman be a setup man to David Bednar and also slide into that either 7th inning or 9th inning role every now and then, because last year that was a position he was in with the Texas Rangers. He was a closer in Kansas City and he was a setup man in Texas. In his 61 games between Kansas City and Texas, 34 of those games saw him pitch in the 8th inning, with 19 in the 9th and the final 7 coming in the 7th. He was also very good in a setup role for Texas for closer Jose Leclerc, who had a phenomenal postseason. He posted 6 of his 14 holds last year with Texas, and he also had 6 holds in 9 appearances in the playoffs, pitching 8 innings with a 2.25 ERA. So it's a role that he's already coming out of from Texas, and a role that I think fits him well now with David Bednar, a closer that I think many would argue is better than Jose Leclerc. So the setup role seems to be the role that will suit him well at this stage of his career, which is perfectly fine. I think that's the role that you're going to see him in. Now, as we go throughout this episode, you're going to hear me say that there's the potential that you see him in the 7th inning. There's the potential you see him in the 9th inning. That's just because bullpens are just they fluctuate a lot. They fluctuate between injuries. They fluctuate between rest time. They fluctuate between a guy struggling for a week or two. They fluctuate between a lot of different things. And now with the introduction of Aroldis Chapman changing roles all around the bullpen, of course, it's going to change roles for a lot of these guys, especially if he does step in and take that setup role as his primary role. What are the roles for the rest of the bullpen going to be? That's really the biggest question now. But the thing is, when you look at what the Pirates have in the bullpen, these roles changing isn't going to really mean all that much, because they have a lot of talent available there. And that's what we're going to talk about here in just a moment on the Locked On Pirates podcast. But before we do that, we're going to talk about the wonderful people over at FanDuel. Folks, FanDuel Sportsbook is your one place to do all of your sports betting in 2024 because it is NFC and AFC Conference Championship time. And if you are feeling lucky in your sports betting acumen, go to FanDuel Sportsbook and FanDuel.com/locked on because the NFL playoffs are wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. It's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use, and there are so many different ways to bet, like live same game parlays. You can find bets in the new Explore tab, make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays, and more. So visit fanduel.com/locked on and make your first bet a layup because FanDuel is an official partner of the NFL and an official sponsor of the Locked On Podcast Network. And folks, don't forget either that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. So go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel brought to you by Locked On. Guys, thank you so much again for always tuning into the Locked On Pirates podcast, as you always do here on YouTube, Spotify, Odyssey, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. And as you heard before the break, we're going to talk about bullpen roles now with Chapman's introduction. Now, that was one of the big things that everybody immediately jumped on social media when this happened is what's going to happen with X, Y, and Z? Where is Chapman going to fit in here? Why is he the highest paid player on the roster this year? Blah, 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 etc. Shut all that down for a second. It's now been about a day and a half, 2 days since we figured out what Aroldis Chapman is going to be, where this is going to fit in. That's why I wanted to do an initial reaction yesterday, and then I wanted to do a kind of more in-depth reaction today where we look at just the bullpen as a whole now with him being introduced to the roster. Now, there was one name that was being thrown around a ton as to what will happen with his role, and that was Colin Holderman. The main thoughts or questions that I saw on social media after Chapman's signing centered around Colin Holderman, who, of course, had an impressive 2023, being among basically everybody in Major League Baseball and holds with 27. He also had that impressive 3.86 ERA in 56 innings, while also having a solid 58 strikeouts to 20 walks, increasing his K per 9 and walk per 9 from 2022. His percentage of strikes thrown also increased from 2022 to 2023 from 59% to 63%. So what happens with Colin Holderman? And also, I am sorry for the sniffles today. I've been dealing with a little bit of a cold. I'm here to tell you, folks, when it comes to Colin Holderman, no doubt he had a phenomenal 2023. Has the potential to do it again in 2024. There's also the potential that the Pirates, now with the introduction of Chapman, may go out and look around and see what's available. If teams are interested in Colin Holderman, it's something they've done in the past with relievers. But we're going to stay on the assumption that Holderman is here to stay, which I would like him to be. Because I'm also here to tell you folks that the most likely 7th, 8th, 9th inning trio that you're going to see is Colin Holderman, Aroldis Chapman, and David Bednar. You've probably heard that a lot already. That's going to be the 7, 8, 9, boom, that's it. But depending on matchups, depending on rest, depending on other things, I believe Holderman and Chapman are interchangeable in that scenario. Now, you may be wondering, why is that? Why would you not just plant them at 7 or 8? Let's use an example. Say the Pirates are winning the game. Mitch Keller is giving you 6 strong innings. You go into the 7th inning and you're facing whoever. And say the 7th inning, the team has 2 lefties slated and then all the righties in the 8th. Let's say that all righties in the 8th inning versus 2 lefties in the 7th. Who would you want on the mound in the 7th inning if there's 2 lefties that are slated to come up? Now, obviously, there's the case of the opposing manager saying, well, I'm going to sub these guys out now that they're bringing in a lefty. whatever. You'd want Chapman in the 7th inning, no? Against lefties in a favorable matchup. Now, let's be honest here. Chapman has been favorable against both sides across his entire career just because of how good he is. But Colin Holderman, I'd want him pitching against righties. That's just how I would be. I think that they are interchangeable pitchers here for this role. Now, obviously, I still think their roles are going to be setup guy for Bednar or 7th inning guy to set up for the setup guy. I don't think it's ever going to be anything different other than that unless the Pirates are in a must-win spot and need one of them to pitch in the 5th or 6th inning late in the year. But the introduction of Chapman doesn't mean you'll never see Holderman in a setup role again. I didn't like seeing that discourse. It was just something that I just didn't find right because there's always different factors that play into this. Matchups are going to dictate that sometimes, but that 7, 8, 9 has the potential, folks, to be absolutely lethal for this Pittsburgh Pirates team. It really does. I mean, you look at what Holderman did last year. You look at Bednar in his all-star campaign again, and then you introduce Aroldis Chapman into that. And that's just, you're talking about those 3 guys. Then there's the rest, which, speaking in Pirates terms, what I usually say, then there's the rest, that would usually be a bad thing. But during this discussion, no, folks, this isn't a bad thing at all. You look at the rest of the bullpen, it's going to feature guys like Jose Hernandez, potentially a guy like Colin Selby, potentially a guy in Kyle Nicholas who would love to see some improvement from last year. Carmen Mlodinski, who many of you love and I also love as well. You look at the NRI and Hunter Stratton, who could potentially push his way into this bullpen, and Ryan Borucki. That group was a unit that had a combined 5.45 ERA last year. Now, when you eliminate Colin Selby and Kyle Nicholas, who had high ERAs due to small sample size and other different factors. So that's Jose Hernandez, Mlodinski, Stratton, Borucki. That group of 4 had an ERA of 2.98 last year, folks. That's from your 4 guys who, one, didn't really have a role last year, and 4 guys that you wouldn't even necessarily say you have to depend on. That's a very good problem to have. And when I was looking at this, I said, there's no way they had an ERA that low between those 4 guys. And I calculated it 3 different times, and I was like, 2.98? That is elite stuff. Now, you also might want to know as well that that group of 4 doesn't include another favorite from Pirates fans last year, Dauri Moreta, who was that 6, 7 inning guy for the Pittsburgh Pirates last year, along with Mlodinski, to get to Colin Holderman and that Bednar duo. And he was impressive as well. He had 76 strikeouts at 58 innings and a 3.72 ERA. Dauri Moreta's not going to get lost in this fold either, folks. He's still going to be a very important part to this rotation. You then add in Aroldis Chapman, and the Pirates will enter 2024 with 6 relievers who had less than a 4 ERA last year. 6. That is a very good thing. If you can go into a season with 6 relievers who had less than a 4 ERA last year, some of them who had less than a 3. Borucki was there. Holderman was in that range. Mlodinski sure was. Hunter Stratton was. So for the rest of the group, obviously, based off rest and other factors, you're looking at these guys being your guys that enter in the 5th or the 6th inning, depending on the starter's day and whatnot. You would more like it to be at the 6th inning, if anything, because that means that your pitcher probably gave you 5 strong innings. And not only are you handing it off to the trio of Holderman, Chapman, and Bednar, but you're doing so in an efficient manner. Mlodinski is good, folks. We know that. He's going to be a phenomenal relief pitcher for this team moving forward. He's only going to continue to get better. He's young. He's controllable. He has stuff. Moreta showed positive flashes last year. Jose Hernandez is entering his 2nd year and isn't going to be pushed into as big of a role as he was last year with that 4.97 ERA with the loss of Jarlin Garcia. Borucki could step back but could still be viable. back to going what I said, a player could regress but still be good. Borucki could regress and still be a good option. And who knows what Colin Selby or Kyle Nicholas or others could turn into. You also could expect that your fifth and sixth inning guys are going to be Hernandez, Mlodinski, Borucki, and Moreta. That gives you 4 options that I told you already were all under a 4 ERA that you can really trust to come into the game and hold a lead for you or at least keep you in the game. You can expect the 7th to be Holderman or Chapman with the other in the 8th. You know Bednar's getting the 9th. That's your most likely structure that you're going to see. And it's a structure that works. And it's a structure that offers depth. It's a structure that offers many viable options and eliminates a ton of negative factors. But is it a structure that could be dominant? And it's a structure, again, that has the keys to be a dominant one. But how dominant are we talking? And what does it mean for the team overall? We're going to talk about that in just a moment. And folks, welcome to the third and final segment of today's episode of Locked On Pirates. Again, sorry about the sniffles today. I am dealing with a cold. Weather change in Savannah, Georgia always happens. I also have some news for all of you folks. So we will be going back to 5 days a week starting in February. Pitchers and catchers, of course, report on Valentine's Day. So that's going to be a fun time to kind of catch up on some news and see what's going on. I also expect February to be a very busy month for baseball overall, considering there are still a ton of free agents that haven't signed. There's still a ton that the Pirates can do, and they're going to have a lot of roster spots opening up here pretty soon with some guys going back on the injured list. So we'll see what the Pirates decide to do in the month of February, but I anticipate this is going to be the biggest year of Locked On Pirates to date, and we'll talk about that as we're closing the show. But why will this bullpen help this team in more ways than we think? $10.5 million may seem like a lot for a guy like Chapman, especially at this stage of his career. I know a lot of people are upset about that number, but that's just where the market is right now. That's just how the market has been set. That's just what the market is. His introduction has a lot of shockwaves in the bullpen. It just does. Obviously, I just outlined how the roles could change, what it does for this team, etc. But please find a negative that's on field about Chapman being in this bullpen. It's hard to find one. Again, based off the names that I mentioned, the Pirates have about 6, maybe 7 relief arms that they can trust on any given day in any given game. That is before you look at guys that could be introduced to the bullpen throughout the year. That is before the Pittsburgh Pirates maybe find some starting pitching help. And given injuries, rest, and other factors, that's a huge plus for a team that hasn't had an overly dominant bullpen since Jason Grilli and Mark Melancon and company were here in that 2013 through 2015 window. You also, and Tony Watson, can't not mention Tony Watson because he's the reason O'Neal Cruz is a Pittsburgh Pirate. It also positively impacts the starting pitching staff as well, because we know the starting pitching staff needs work, and we'd like to see additions to it because, again, what did I say about the amount of options you have in the bullpen and the 7, 8, 9 trio that could be dominant? Your starters suddenly don't have to go nearly the distance every day. We were seeing that with Mitch Keller a lot last year. Now, I was happy to see it from him and that he stayed healthy, but I don't know how comfortable I feel with Mitch Keller pitching 7 to 8 innings every single start. Now, if he's doing it efficiently and he's healthy, fine. I don't care. But if he's having to go 7 to 8 innings and giving up 3 to 4 runs, although being efficient, I just don't like seeing that every 5 days. But now in a perfect world, in a world where it's not ever going to be perfect in baseball, for example, whoever pitches 6 solid innings with a lead and hands it off to the trio of Holderman, Chapman, and Bednar, folks, that is the formula. That is the formula right there. In a perfect world, or a near perfect world, because again, baseball is hard to be perfect, Mitch Keller pitches 6 shutout innings. Pirates have a lead, hand it off to Colin Holderman, Aroldis Chapman, Bednar, done. Dusted. Game over. But think even if they go 5 innings. Just 5 strong innings from Mitch Keller or Martin Perez or Marco Gonzalez or Quinn Priester or another signing they make. Throw in a mixture of one of those pitchers that I mentioned earlier, like Borucki or Mlodinski or Moreta or Hernandez, and you suddenly have a lethal unit of pitchers out there out of the bullpen. But I think the biggest component that you really have to take into account here with what the Chapman signing does for this bullpen and the amount of options that the Pirates have at their disposal, it shortens games. And for a team like the Pittsburgh Pirates, that is probably one of, if not the most important things that they could do to begin the season. Because you look at the starting rotation right now, it features Keller, it features Perez, it features Gonzalez. You are likely right now, based off of the structure of the rotation, to expect that one of Quinn Priester, Roansy Contreras, or Luis Ortiz will be a part of that rotation as well, maybe 2 of them. So if you have the ability to shorten games for these young pitchers like Roansy, Priester, and Ortiz, and for guys like veterans Martin Perez and Marco Gonzalez, folks, one, that doesn't put wear and tear on these pitchers to the point where we saw what we saw last year where Borucki was opening games. 2, that buys you a lot of time for guys like, I don't know, Paul Skeens, Jared Jones, JT Brubaker, Mike Burrows, for JT and Mike to get healthy, but for also Jared Jones, Anthony Solometto, Paul Skeens, the names I keep mentioning that are call-up candidates this year, to take their time in coming up here, to not rush them to come up here and expect 6 to 7 innings from them every start. It's just bigger than just the bullpen here, folks, with the introduction of Chapman. It just is. And you look at the bullpen last year, excluding Chapman, and it was a group that had a 4.27 ERA last year as a unit. And that number, with the introduction of Chapman, with positive development from young guys like Mlodinski, Hernandez, and, limited regression from Borucki and Moreta, you look at that and you're taking pressure off of guys like David Bednar. You're taking pressure off of guys like Colin Holderman and Aroldis Chapman to make them feel like they have to do all the work. Now, obviously, those are your guys at the end of games that you are expecting to close games, and those guys work the best in pressure, but you're also not expecting that trio to do literally everything for you out of the bullpen to the point where you have to throw a guy out there that you can't trust. Again, with this bullpen, you can trust at least 6 of these pitchers based off of what we have seen and what we saw last season. You also have NRIs like Hunter Stratton, Ben Heller, Ryder Ryan, who could eventually be options as well due to injury and due to other things. And you take all of that into account, and folks, you're getting into the double digits for the amount of pitching that you have at your disposal if you're the Pittsburgh Pirates. And suddenly, you've created a very deep bullpen group. And not only have you created a deep bullpen group, but a rather efficient one if the relievers return or improve on the form that we saw in 2023. Because this isn't even really speculative. These are things that we've seen. We've seen Ryan Borucki have a strong ending to last year. We've seen Carmen Mlodinski grow up in front of our eyes already. We've seen Jose Hernandez flash some things. We've seen Colin Holderman and what he can do. We've seen David Bednar be a 2-time All-Star. We've seen Aroldis Chapman be a dominant force as both a closer and a setup player in his career. These are all things that you have seen with your own 2 eyes, folks. There's no speculation here. This is a bullpen that can and should be dominant and has the potential to be the best position group the Pirates have next season. And we're going to talk about it too during the player previews in February, and we're going to break down a lot of this stuff in even further depth. But it's hard to find a negative from the Chapman signing on the field. And even if he's only here for the first half of the season, he'll no doubt help this roster in more ways than one. He just will. He's going to help this roster, folks. And this bullpen can be dominant. Folks, thank you so much for tuning in to the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates every day. Again, follow me on Twitter. My name is Ethan Smith. You find me there at MVP_Ethan or at Locked On Pirates. You can also find the show on Spotify, Odyssey, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Comment with any questions or concerns. Have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, guys. Thank you so much for always tuning in. And until I see you tomorrow, I'll see you on the flip side.